Did you miss me?
100%.
Yeah,
Tons.
there's going to be a lot of Kara coming up for
Tons.
you. Just get ready. You'll be like, I'm so sick of this bitch.
It is on.
Hi, everyone. Today, we've got a crossover episode for you. That's right. I'm talking to my Pivot co-host, Scott Galloway, about his new book, Notes on Being a Man. I have had a very surprising and wonderful relationship with Scott, and one of the topics we do talk about a lot is young men. I have 3 sons myself, and he has been a great mentor to them in many ways. And it's been a real journey for the two of us, the friendship itself, and how men and women get along and how we affect each other. And to me, it's been really positive. Scott can be very feminine in many ways, and I can be very masculine. And I think we're trying to upend the ideas of that and how you can add to each other's life. I suspect he's made me more kind, and I think I have made him just better. He's just a better man from knowing me, and that's the facts. So keep watching. Scott, welcome to my side hustle.
Yeah, so I was trying to think, you stay at my place a lot. I've never stayed at your place. This is what it must feel like to stay at your place. It feels a little bit uncomfortable.
I have invited you to my homes. You're not interested because they're not fancy enough.
No, it's not that. I like to be able to call someone and yell, "Where is my fucking breakfast?" And I can't do that when I stay at friends' places.
Yeah, I can bring you breakfast. We could do that. I can handle that. I can make some nice eggs. But you know what we're here to do? We're here to talk about your new book.
All right.
You've written a whole bunch of books, and we met through your first book, The Four, I think it was. How did you come to this subject? Because this has been something that's happening over the past couple of years since we've had a relationship. And where did you go from I'm worried about raising my 2 sons to a bigger concern about young men in general?
So, look, I relate to this. As you get a bit older, you start thinking about, and this took me longer than most people, like how you can use your platform to talk about issues other people aren't talking about or recognizing enough, and how can you have maybe even a bit of a positive impact. And the data was just so overwhelming, and I didn't feel, and it was also a dangerous thing to talk about. It's gotten less dangerous to talk about it. But 5 years ago, if you did anything that kind of resembled advocating for young men or highlighting their problems, there was a understandable gag reflex that you were one of those people. And that is the people who initially filled this void. To the far right's credit, they recognized the problem earlier than anybody, but their answer was to take non-whites and women back to the 50s. They blamed special interest groups for the descent and troubles of men. And so there was a really understandable gag reflex. But what I saw was so striking. You go into a morgue and 5 young people have died by suicide, 4 men. Mm-hmm. There's several million men now in America that are neither employed in education or in training. And some men now, a decent number of men in their 20s, spend less time outside than prison inmates because they become so addicted to their phones. So I saw an opportunity to talk about this stuff. I've been talking about it for 5-6 years, and I wanted to take a more methodical approach to it. I relate to these young men who are struggling. I think there, by the grace of God, go I. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a remarkable young man. I didn't have a ton of economic or romantic opportunities, so I just sort of relate to it on a personal level, raised by a single mother. And I saw an opportunity, and the opportunity, I think, is the following, or the need. I think every young person needs a code to help them sort through and navigate the thousands of decisions they make every day. And you can get your code from religion, from your parents, from the military, from your patriotism. There's a lot of places to get a code. But I think a lot of young men lack that. They lack a real basis of principles for making decisions. And I think that masculinity can serve as a code when it's described in an aspirational, updated way. And also, I think it's easy for a lot of us to lean into those attributes that we feel naturally that can be channeled in very positive ways.
That's right. But was there a thing that you noticed? I mean, these are all statistics, but I think it must be something more personal, correct?
Well, I have boys, right? And you have boys.
I do, 3.
And you just see, kind of see what's going on. If my 15-year-old has a party, the boys are kind of dopey. Mm-hmm. They're nice, but they're dopey. They can't even make eye contact, a lot of them. And some of the girls look like they could be the junior senators from Pennsylvania. Girls are just pulling away from boys. And we don't want to do anything to get in the way of that. We want to celebrate it. But the fact that we're probably going to have pretty soon 2-to-1 female to male college graduates and a lack of economically viable men. Women mate horizontally or socioeconomically horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. And when the pool of viable males, horizontal and up, keeps shrinking, there's a lack of mating opportunities. And for me, what I want for my boys, I used to think I wanted them to be economically successful. Now I've realized that the whole shooting match is I want them to have really strong partnerships and have kids someday. That's what I would want for them. And unfortunately, today, that probably means being economically viable for a male.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was having boys and seeing the contrast between boys and girls their age and just wondering what kind of world waits for them. My biggest supporters, a lot of young men come up to me and they're very nice, but my biggest supporters are single mothers. And these are feminists. So a lot of them are feminists who say, something's going on. And the email or the message goes something like this. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters, 1 boy. One daughter's in Chicago working for a PR firm. The other's in graduate school at Penn. And my 27-year-old son is in the basement playing video games and vaping. So I thought, okay, I think I understand these young men. I'm raising 2 boys, and I think there's a lot of data. And I think that masculinity also needs to be transitioned from being something that's seen as a negative to something that's a positive.
And seen as negative because a lot of the sort of maniverse, I guess, has been very negative and anti-women. You know, there was or women are the blame or something, like the focus has been on that. It's also been a very performative masculinity. It's not a pleasant version of a man, right? It's a very unpleasant version of a man, essentially.
Well, naturally, the two role models that are going to be role models, whether we want it or not, are going to be the president of the United States and the wealthiest person in the world. In a capitalist society, people are going to, who's number one and who's the most powerful person in the world? And we should model those attributes. And I think a lot of young men look to Trump and Musk. And what I would argue is that they've conflated masculinity with coarseness and cruelty. I just can't think of anything less masculine than cutting off aid to HIV-positive mothers.
We'll talk about politics in a bit, but one of the things, of course, I think it is about, having read it, is about your life and how you evolved from, a self-described skinny kid with acne who got average grades in school to who you are now. And I think one of the things I've noticed when people are like, what's he really like? I'm like, I think he's kind of the skinny kid from school still, in a weird way, personally. But you didn't grow up with a strong father figure in your life. Your dad left your mom when you were a boy, moved to Ohio, and quickly remarried. Talk about your mom, because I think that, to me, it shaped a lot of your idea of masculinity.
Well, look, I talk about my mom a lot. I always say I'm a 6-year-old man that still hasn't gotten over the death of his mother.
Nor should you.
Yeah, I lean into it. I hope my boys miss me terribly. So, I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary, lied of my life. And I've always said, I like to reverse engineer. I have a 0.1% life. And a lot of it isn't my fault. And so I like to reverse engineer to the things that weren't my fault and then try and reinvest in those things. And the first thing you realize is that if a kid has someone who implicitly and explicitly every day tells them, I love you and you have worth and I just think you're wonderful, you can't help but sort of start to believe it. So even if you are physically very attractive, even if you don't get great grades, even if you don't have some of the benefits that wealthier households have, you do grow up with a little bit of a fire of confidence. And I got that from my mother. And she was a great role model for me. She was always a really good friend. She always worked really hard. And she was always kind of common sense. I lacked male role models in my life. And I think it really hurt me. And I think the research bears out that in the United States, what's interesting is that we have the most single-parent homes in America. And what's interesting is the outcomes are largely the same. Boys, it's totally different. The moment a boy loses a male role model through death, disease, or abandonment, he becomes at that moment more likely to be incarcerated than graduate from college. What it ends up, and all the research points this way, is that while boys are physically stronger, they're emotionally and mentally much weaker than girls. And they don't know that if that's because women have had to endure childbirth or menstruation, or quite frankly, have just taken more shit and have become more resilient throughout history. But boys are neurologically and emotionally much weaker. And when they lose a male role model, quite frankly, that's the point of when they come off the tracks. So I feel like I almost didn't go to college. I wasn't as good at sports as I could have been. I wasn't as kind as I could have been. I had bad manners. I had what I would call fairly mediocre character. And I think a lot of that is because the depth and physical presence and mentorship of a male was absent in my life.
Was there anybody? Was there actually?
Yeah, some of my mom's boyfriends stayed in touch with me. I had coaches.
Mhm.
A camp counselor stayed in touch with me. I have this wonderful story. When I was 13, eighth grade, big public school, not very good at anything, not a ton of friends. Both my kids had left the school because my school had started busing, and my two friends had money, and so their parents immediately pulled them out and sent them to a Tony school called Windward. But in media, they talk about, quote unquote, someone with a second family. You find out in the show that the guy has an entirely different family in addition to his first family, but media never talks about the second family. I was the son of a woman. We were the second family. My primary role model was my mom's boyfriend, who had a family in Arizona and used to come spend time with me and my mom every other weekend. And he was actually a good man. You immediately think this is not a good person. He was very good to me. And one Sunday night, I said, "What's a stock?" And he kind of explained it to me. And then he pulled out two $100 bills, which I'd never seen before, and said, "If by the time I'm not back here in 2 weeks, I'm taking it back, I want you to go buy some stocks, go down to one of those fancy brokerages." So I walked into Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith. I sat in the lobby. I got very self-conscious, walked across the street to Dean Witter. And I had these $200 bills. I still remember the cellophane envelope and seeing Benjamin peek out. And I said, "I'm here to buy stock." And I pulled the dollars out and they went flying everywhere. And this 31-year-old guy with a big Jufro, for lack of a better term, named Cicero came up and said, "Hi, I'm Cicero." And he told me about stocks. I got my first lesson in stocks. When there's more people who want to buy a stock than want to sell it, the sellers raise the price. He gave me my first lesson. And we decided to buy Columbia Pictures because I really liked this Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I like movies. And every day for 2 years, I would go to the payphone booth, put 2 dimes in, and call Cy, and he would talk to me about my stocks and would say, "The stock's down today because Casey's shadow is a bomb," or whatever.
Yeah.
And I
Just
made a
one
lot of
stock? You were one stock young
I was
man.
one stock.
With Cy.
$200. And I grew it to, I think, $208 in 2 years.
Yeah.
But I didn't have, I had friends, but I wasn't very popular. I used to 2 or 3 days a week, maybe it was 1 or 2 days, go to Dean Witter and Westwood and hang out with Cy in his little bad cubicle.
Wow.
And
Cy. What happened to Cy?
Well, it's interesting. One, I've made a lot of money starting and selling businesses, but 70 or 80% of my worth is because I've always invested in stocks and think I understand the markets better than your average bear and understand the power of compound interest. And I got that at the age of 13. I got a passion for stocks. So lost touch with Cy. And I tell the story in my class, and every year I would give them the task of trying to find Cicero.
Oh.
And about 12 years ago, someone used Facebook and they found him. And he owns a store selling furs in Stockton. And he's retired now in his 80s, and we text each other probably, once every month.
Oh, that's great. Well,
but I did have some wonderful men in my life, but it goes back to sort of an action item, and that is, unfortunately, I think because of abuse in the Catholic Church and Michael Jackson, there's this reticence of men to get involved in a boy's life. And what I would suggest and encourage young men or men to do is that if we want better men, we have to be better men. One, because men just aren't stepping up. And two, because I do think there's a taboo. There's a lot of men in their 30s who are good men who maybe haven't had a chance to get married or have kids of their own, who have fraternal and paternal love to give and don't get involved because they're worried people will suspect them. They're worried that people will look askance at them when they say, "I'd like to get involved in a young man's life."
Yeah. Well.
And we need to do away with that because there are wonderful men out there that have love and concern to give. And also, there's a lot of them, when I've talked to them, feel like, well, I'm not a CEO, I'm not that interesting, I'm not that successful. The wonderful thing about being a mentor to a boy is it's super easy to add value because the decisions they try to make on their own are such bad decisions. It's just super easy to weigh in and add value. Right. I'm mentoring a kid right now, and he called me 3 months ago and has a good job in Baltimore and announced he was moving to Alaska. It's just a few questions. Why are you moving to Alaska? Well, I saw a program on it. It looks amazing. Okay. Don't you have a good job? Yeah. Okay. You can have a job in Alaska? Okay. Isn't your mom sick? I mean, just a few questions, right? Before he moves to Alaska.
Now, one of the things you're upfront about is the fact that you have no training on the subject of boys or men, either as an academic or a therapist. You were a marketing professor at NYU. People who do and written about the topic. There's social scientist Richard Reeves, who you call your Yoda on the subject. Also, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, your colleague at NYU. Talk about what you're bringing to the table that's different, because these are, a lot of people are focused on this thing. And what do you hope to add to the conversation?
A lot of the stories are like where I got it wrong and what I've learned. A lot of the things I talk about are the building blocks of being a man. I didn't demonstrate until much later in life, and it's something I'm not proud of. What I think I bring is a transparency around where I've screwed up, and such that boys can relate to me. And I'm trying to say, look, this is what I got right, this is what I got wrong, and this is my way. It might not be the right way, but here's another guy when he was young, things could have turned out much differently for me. And these are some best practices and some worst practices based on my life experience. And also, I do try to do a lot of research from people who actually know what they're talking about.
When your kids were born, you noted being a dad meant working all the time and making money. And we've talked about this. And you write about missing a lot of the first few years of your sons' lives because you were so singularly focused on providing for them. You're a big provider, comes out of your mouth quite a lot. Talk about when that changed as a parent and shifted, because there's a mistake you corrected, presumably. Although it's not a mistake to want to provide for your kids either.
So I think it's important everyone does an assessment of their addictions, and that is things you continue to engage in that hurt other parts of your lives. I think everyone has a certain amount of addiction, even if they don't, even if it's not substances. I'm addicted to money and the affirmation of strangers, and that is at a very young age. I had money was always. I've always said if you have money, you don't really know what it's like to not have money. You can have sympathy, but it's really hard to have empathy. One of the worst days of my childhood was when I lost my second jacket in a week because we just couldn't afford the $30 for a jacket. And I knew my mom was going to notice, and she was going through a very difficult time. And I knew the house was going to come crumbling down because we didn't have $30 for a jacket.
Do you remember the type of jacket it was?
Oh, it was just a nothing nice, not like a Izod or Lacoste or Nautica, which was a big brand when I was a kid. Nothing fancy, but jackets for some reason all cost $30 from Sears or JCPenney's. And also, I would say my drive or desire for money was based on women, specifically two different examples. My mom got very sick when I was a young man, and I remember coming home. She called me. I was a first year in business school. Called me and said, my mom was not dramatic. Said, "You need to come home. I'm doing really poorly." And she'd had a mastectomy, and they discharged her early, which hospitals do because having someone in a hospital is expensive. And I walked in, Kara, to the situation in my house that was just, for me at that time, was just unthinkable. I'd never experienced anything like someone so violently ill. And I called, and they said, she needs to go back to the hospital. So they're like, well, we need to send an ambulance, and they're going to take her to county. And trust me on this, you don't want to take her to county. And I'm like, so what do I do? And they said, get a nurse. So I called some services, and nurses were $35 an hour. And I had about $400 in my checking account. So I'm like, I can afford a nurse for 12 hours. And to be a 25-year-old male who, your protective instincts kind of kick in, who's supposed to be smart, going to business school, interviewing with, Intel and Microsoft for the summer, and I can't take care of my mom when she's that vulnerable. Up until that point, I've been kind of sleepwalking through life. That really focused me on getting my shit together and trying to make money. And also the second thing's much less virtuous. I always wanted a romantic and sexual partners. I just wanted that as a man. And I immediately connected the dots that in a capitalist society, your selection set of mates is broadened if you are economically viable.
So where was a moment being a parent when you realized maybe spending more time, the time was what was valuable?
The seminal moments in your life are pretty predictable. They're usually about life and death. When my mom died, it changed everything for me. And also when my first son was born. And it wasn't a Hallmark or a life insurance commercial. The first thing I felt when my son came marching out of my partner was fear and shame. I had been working so hard, taking so many risks. And I was born I came of age in the 90s, and you were there in the internet where you were supposed to go all in on a company.
Yeah.
put everything, borrow against your stock because you're in it to win it. And I'm so fucking awesome that if I throw 110% at red envelope that just went public, and I was one of those idiots that borrowed money to buy more stock, and the VCs and your board love that, and they don't want you to sell any stock because I thought you were in it to win it. And then when '08 came, I lost everything. I was broke. And my son is born. And the first thing I felt was not bright lights and angels singing. It was shame and fear. Like, oh my God, it's no longer, I could always take care of myself. I'm not a humble person. I'm remarkably talented. I work hard. I knew I could always take care of myself. But sitting there with a new kid who's going to be vulnerable, with his mom who's going to need some time and need to focus on the kid, I felt like I had failed as a man. It was an awful feeling. I remember feeling so nauseous and so scared, and just this feeling of dread. And it was very, very motivating for me. And I worked around the clock for the next 5 or 7 years, maybe 10 years. And let me be clear, it came at a cost. I was not with my kids as little kids as much as I would have liked.
Mm-hmm.
They would have benefited from it. And quite frankly, Kara, it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the way the world should be. I'm talking about the way the world is. I have an exceptional amount of balance, an exceptional amount of involvement in my kids' lives now because I made the conscious decision not to. Now, you can balance. It doesn't mean you don't see them. But I thought it was my job to make sure that in a capitalist society, my kids are going to, and me, we're going to have the opportunities that a capitalist society provides by being very focused on work. And one of my first I have this sort of these 3 legs of the stool of masculinity. I think the first is being a provider. And I think every young man should assume that he needs to take economic responsibility for his household. And let me be clear. Sometimes that means getting out of the way and being more supportive of your partner who happens to be better at that money thing than you. That is also being a man. And a lot of women now who are attending college in greater rates have greater economic opportunities. And while women's economic contribution to the relationship is accelerated, men's contribution domestically and logistically has not kept pace. At the same time, we also have to acknowledge, not in all households, but in a lot of households, when the woman starts making more money than the man, ED usage of ED drugs triples, the likelihood of divorce doubles. There are still expectations in heterosexual relationships that the man has a disproportionate responsibility to be an economic provider.
Sure.
And so,
But it comes at a cost, right? Like
no doubt.
There's
mentioned no free lunch here.
Right. You talked about this 3-legged stool that you talk about a lot, and you said protect, provide, procreate. So explain how you're defining, because the big thesis of your book is how you're trying to reclaim the idea of masculinity to something to celebrate. You're also trying to reimagine what it means to be a man in society. So talk a little bit about what that, because those are sort of typical male viewpoints.
Yep. Well, so I think you want to be emotionally, mentally, physically, and economically strong, and you want to develop economic viability. It takes discipline, it takes credentials, it takes focus. But the whole point of that's a means. The ends is the second stool, and that is protection. And that is, I've enjoyed making money. It was really rewarding to make it with someone else. Like, we sacrificed a lot. My partner and I, she worked, and making it together was the fun part. But the real purpose, the real peace I think you get as an adult, I think this is true of women in addition, but also I think maybe even more so for a man, the only time I've ever really felt peace and I've escaped the trap of more, I always wanted my whole life, no matter how much money I made, I want more. No matter how famous I got, I want to be more famous and awesome. No matter how many women I dated, but I could date hotter women. No matter how fabulous my weekends were, I want fucking more all the time. My appetite was never sated. The only time I've ever felt sated is late at night, my kids are asleep, or they roll into the room and instinctively throw their legs over mine. I know my partner feels secure and safe and protected. And I feel like, quite frankly, I feel like a man. I feel like my life makes sense, that I have taken skills and strength to become a provider, to become emotionally supportive, to notice their lives. I know they know I love them immensely. And I feel like my role as a protector has worked. That to me is the most satisfying thing. And I think a lot of men never get there.
But you're not, because some of the words protect, provide, and procreate sound musky, like a little bit, like it's in the regressive kind of masculinity. And it's not, I think, what you're saying exactly, right?
look, the most masculine jobs at a very basic level are considered fireman, cop, and military person. And at the end of the day, they protect. But I also think a form of protection is to notice people's lives. And when I think about, I've been married twice. And when I think about where I failed in my first marriage, everyone talks about people want a sensitive man. I'm not sure that's true. I don't. And I snarkily say that, do you really want a sensitive man that just leaves two people in the car crying in the parallel parking spot unparked? But
Just Scott.
But I think what men need to do a better job, and I think what it means to be a man, is that you slow down from yourself and your own ego, and you notice other people's lives. You realize that your partner needs distinct stages where strangers can clap for her. You need to understand what might be important to her, even if it's not important to you. It's important because it's important to her. You notice how hard it is to work and take care of kids. Because I don't care what anyone says, women almost always take on a disproportionate amount of child rearing. They just can hear the kid get up at night. You sleep like a log and the kid's upstairs and she's already up there because she can hear he's up there.
I sleep like a log, but go ahead.
You sleep right through it? You just scream?
When Amanda first started going out, the kids were yelling and I was sleeping right through it. And she's like, "Are you sleeping right through this?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
You're like, numbers 3 and 4 just don't care. Honey Badger don't give a shit. I've been here. They'll be fine.
I slept through the first two too.
They'll be fine.
They'll be fine. Exactly.
Yeah.
But when it's redefining what that means, right? Because I think you are talking about a sensitive man. You are. You're just not talking about like the sensitive new age male, imagery. Because this is a sensitive man.
I think there's some consumer dissonance here. I really do think that, for example, 80% of women say they want men to initiate romantic contact. So for all this notion and all this fear about a man being a creep or, men, a lot of women will come up to me in bars or in social situations and they will complain that no men approach them. They look great. They're out. They're obviously at a bar. They're ready. They're single and ready to mingle and men don't speak to them. And I think a lot of young men are not developing the skills and have gotten mixed messages around taking risks and approaching people and making them feel safe. Because say you're a guy and you approach a woman at a bar and it ends up she's one of the 300,000 people that works at JP Morgan and he says something stupid and he's drunk. He's now that guy. He's now that creep. And so I think we have to, and this goes to procreation, I think in a weird way, we need to re-embrace young men's horniness. And I use that word. And that is...
It's because you like to say it, but go ahead.
But I think of sexual desire as like fire. I think it can be very damaging. I think if men spend too much time on porn or start to think of women as just sexual objects, it creates unrealistic expectations and they start to develop misogynistic tendencies and they objectify women. But at the same time, wanting to have a romantic partner and eventually a sexual partner can be channeled like fire. You should use that desire to want to dress better, smell better, have a plan, demonstrate kindness. The secret weapon, and there's research around this, the secret weapon, if you want to find romantic and sexual partners for a man, the 3 reasons women are attracted to men sexually are 1, they signal resources. And it doesn't even have to be you have a Range Rover or Panerai at the moment. It can be that you have your act together and you're disciplined and you're smart. You don't buy another bottle of Grey Goose at 2 a.m. You go home because you have work the next morning. 2, you're intelligent. And that's very instinctual. The people who make good decisions for the tribe is more likely to prosper and survive. And the fastest way to communicate intelligence is humor. I've always jokingly said, this is my interpretation of a woman. I'm laughing, I'm naked. And when I was younger, I try to be very raw about this stuff, and I know it's going to trigger some people, but when I was younger, the only dates I ever got, and there were few and far between, Kara, was with women I could make laugh.
Yeah.
That was it. And then the third thing, and this is the secret weapon, and there's research just though that the third thing is kindness.
Yeah. Because
instinctively, women know they're physically smaller, and they will go through periods of gestation where they will need someone kind.
Oh, okay. On that note, every episode we have an expert question. And speaking of laughing and women, let's listen to yours.
Hi, my name's Michelle Wolf.
Oh my God.
My question for Scott is based on a video I saw you did about how a man's secret weapon is kindness. lovely. Should kind of just be like a basic instinct, you would think, but glad we're getting there somehow. My question for you is, because I think this would be a real secret weapon for men, is why can't they find anything? Like, they can't find anything from like a phone charger to like something in the fridge to their emotions. They can't find anything. And why? Why is that? Why, Scott?
I did.
So I'm getting
You're
emotional.
a huge fan of hers.
I was worried I was going to get emotional time. I get emotional. That was so kind of you. I've been trying to track down Michelle. Michelle Wolf is my favorite comedian in the world.
I know she is.
And I've been trying to track her down, and I can't get to her. She won't return my emails. And you found her.
Of course.
My ex-wife used to say to me, if my dick wasn't attached, we'd find it on a card table next to a script of Goodfellas in Soho. I'm always 5 minutes away from losing my keys. I'm going to have to live in a single floor unit the rest of my life because I spent 30 minutes going back to find my sunglasses and my wallet.
You have lots of them. Like, Scott has a drawer of AirPods, just so you know, in New York, which I've liberally borrowed from, but go ahead.
One of the first things I did when I got money was I said to my assistant, I never want to have keys again. I can't have keys.
Yeah.
So look, I think—
Go back to kindness. She was really saying it shouldn't be a basic instinct. She was
but here's the thing.
Yeah.
I do think, and I coach young men around this, have a kindness practice, and it starts with manners.
Mm-hmm.
I try to get— one of my favorite moments of my youngest was I said, you never pour your own water first.
Mm-hmm.
And you always look around the table and you pour other people's water. And we're in this restaurant. We just moved to London.
Mm-hmm.
So he was, I think, 11. And we're at a restaurant, and they brought over this giant pitcher of water, and he got out of his seat, went over, picked up the pitcher of water, which was bigger than him, and whirled up to another table and poured their glasses of water. He thought you were supposed to do that. You're supposed to scan the entire environment for empty water glasses. And I'm like, he's going to be a man.
Yeah.
I think it starts with manners. It starts with saying to yourself, okay, how do I demonstrate acts every day from people who can't reciprocate them such that it becomes muscle memory? Because I got to be honest, Kara, I don't think I'm an innately kind person. I don't think I grew up with a lot of role models around kindness. So as I've gotten older, I've tried to just practice it every day such that it becomes second nature. And I think women notice this.
Well,
and
is that because women have to be kind? You know, it's a survival instinct versus men who don't have to be.
I think that women, and I want to be clear, I'm not an expert on adolescent psychiatry. I'm definitely not an expert on gender studies, but I think a lot of women believe that the world and men and society judge them based on their nurturing qualities, which embedded in that is kindness. And the words we use for women who are tough and don't demonstrate kindness in the workplace are much more negative.
Mm-hmm.
If a guy's harsh and he's Steve Jobs, if he's cruel but smart, he's a genius. If you had a female Steve Jobs in the 90s, I can't even imagine the words that would have been used to describe her.
Bitch.
So, it would have been worse than that.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that a kindness practice, and also one of the things that's unfortunate about mating is that if you talk to people who've been together longer than 30 years, they did a survey of couples who've been together forever, 70 to 80% of them, one was much more interested in the other in the beginning. This kind of romantic comedy where people see each other and fall in love, that's just not how it works, or not usually. And almost always, like 90% of the cases, it was the man much more interested in the woman. Because men are much less choosy. We want to spread our seed to the four corners of the earth, and women want to put up a much finer screen to pick the smartest, fastest, and strongest seed. If you're in a room of 400 people, something like 300 of the men, if there's alcohol involved, would have sex with most of the women. Most of the women would have sex with none of the men. And so the way women fall in love or fall in like is if a man can demonstrate excellence. I worked with him and he was really good at what he did.
Right.
Or I went to temple with him and he was kind to his parents. I liked the way he smelled. I love his body language. We hung out. We were just friends and I found out he was really funny. You know, I like the way he danced. And the problem is now is there are very few venues to demonstrate excellence.
Let me move on because I think a lot of it has to do with masculinity today, right now in politics and pop culture. As you noted, President Trump and MAGA movement strategically courted young men during the 2024 election by flying into the manosphere. They filled the political vacuum with coarse language, Joe Rogan, UFC, meme coins. it's a regressive, as you said, version of masculinity, which is you're not writing about. But why did it work? And it's now not working, apparently. There's a lot, like Rogan is sort of shifting back. A lot of young men they're showing polling. There was just a poll today, which is shifting towards where you are, I think, more. But why did that work from your perspective?
Risk, risk aggression, both. They say things that are indelicate. They take risks. Elon Musk is enormously masculine in the sense that men, in order for our species to survive, men have needed to have a propensity to, they see movement in the bushes, they don't overthink it. They grab a fucking spear and go and try and kill it and bring it back. That young men, the reason we have an unbelievable democracy is because mostly young men, but a lot of young women have a willingness to do really aggressive, borderline stupid shit, and that is rush a pill box and try and take out the enemy. And a lot of people would describe that as recklessness, but there is valor involved, and that is the Carnegie Award, which awards people who risk their own lives in the moment to save someone else from harm. Literally that's the rushing into a burning building. They give about 80 a year, 75 are men. Men are more risk aggressive. And some of that is very positive. Some of that can be channeled into a man on a combat field is more likely to put himself in harm's way to save a fellow comrade. A woman is more likely to say, let's think about this and not be stupid. And quite frankly, you need both. And you need both in combat. So, but risk aggression, again, if I highlight attributes that reflect women in a positive light, people nod their head and say that's fine. If I highlight attributes that reflect men in a positive light, there's a bit of a check your notes and fear, and is this guy one of those guys? So you asked what the positive thing is. I'll say with Musk, the guy takes enormous risks.
So that's an attractive trait, but then it veers into cruelty. I want you to make a case to voters on the left. How do you overcome the legitimate concerns that talking about boys right now is going to crowd out conversations that others have of losing rights, losing access, representation? How do you talk about both at the same time? Because it feels like it's been an either or, right? Either we talk about women and others, marginalized communities, or we talk about men. I feel like, well, if men are mad, we're all fucked, really, in some fashion. But how does the left talk about it so that it's not someone has to lose, right? What's the positive way of talking about it?
Well, this isn't a zero-sum game. Gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. I mean, we can absolutely acknowledge women still face huge barriers. The moment a woman decides to use her ovaries, which is pretty important for the species, she goes to 73 cents on the dollar. Her career is much more difficult when she has kids. There's still huge issues. There's still just a fraction of medical research around the cancers affecting women. I mean, it's just like, okay, so we don't care about women's health? So there's still huge issues. Social media preys, as you know, on girls. Mm-hmm. So there's still huge issues. But what I would say is, if I were to say advise the next president on what the key word is, it'd be restoration. We need to restore our alliances with our great trading partners in other democracies. We need to restore the alliance between moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats to have a working middle. But I think the greatest alliance in history is the alliance between men and women. And unfortunately, both genders have done a great job of convincing themselves that it's the other gender's fault. And when we talk about the great civil rights acts, when we talk about women's rights, what we also need to acknowledge is there were a lot of very masculine men at the forefront of that. It was a collective effort. It wasn't just women threatening men, like saying, we're not going to raise your kids unless you do this. There was enormous leadership among women that was needed, who were fearless and drove these changes. But they also had a huge base of support from confident, loving men who realized this was really important. So we need to start conflating masculinity with the protection of special interest groups. You don't even need to understand the trans community. You may think it's ridiculous to have a third bathroom. You may think, okay, we shouldn't have transgender athletes in NC2A sports. But your immediate reflex, your immediate instinct should be, if you see a community being demonized, as the transgender community has been weaponized and demonized, your default has to be protection. And I say, what we need to raise our boys around and masculinity around is that women cross the street when they see men on that side of the street because they feel safe. And the reality is they don't right now. Mm-hmm.
No, I still cross streets. Yeah, but you did write that the 2024 election was a referendum of failing young men, and we talked about that a lot on the podcast. So how do you win back those with that message? What they feel alienated by the party's perceived weakness and hostility. What is the strategy?
Well, I think your instincts are correct, and that is to develop a strategy. You have to diagnose the issue. And the reason we elected an insurrectionist president, I believe, was because of struggling young men. And that is, if you look at the three groups that pivoted hardest from blue to red, it was one, Latinos who don't want to be, a lot of issues there. It's hard to even define them as one group. Numbers 2 and 3 were people under the age of 30. They just want change. They just want chaos. And then the most interesting thing is the third cohort that shifted hardest from blue to red was women aged 45 to 64. And my thesis is that's their mother's care because, again, this triggers some people, but there's still a lot of women in America who will vote for whoever they perceive as being in the best interest of their husbands or their sons. And when your son isn't doing well and your husband is out of work, you don't care about territorial sovereignty in Ukraine or transgender rights. You just want change. And Trump is a chaos agent. He represents change. Now, how do you move forward? The right has incorrectly and I think stupidly conflated masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, and I don't think that's working. At the same time, the left, Kara, has said the answer to masculinity is you should act more like a woman.
Right.
And I don't think that's right either.
Who should men be modeling? Is it like Travis Kelce, Pete Buttigieg?
I don't know. I was with one of them last night, Van Jones. Super strong, super smart, not afraid to say fairly provocative things, not afraid to go against the grain, but also, a dad, a good provider. I think we have to say, first, even acknowledging on the left that there's a difference and there's certain attributes that certain genders are more prone to is upsetting for some people on the left. Even acknowledging that our young men are struggling and that they deserve programs. Governor Moore, who I think is a great role model, came out and said that the focus of his administration was going to be on struggling young men. That was a very brave thing to do. Recognizing that the physical strength, the risk aggressiveness, of young men, the valor they demonstrate plays a huge role in society and that it's needed. Investing in third places where young people can find each other, demonstrate excellence, and fall in love. I think we absolutely need to embrace a modern form of masculinity. Acknowledging that 95% of us are binary and have an easier time leaning into certain characteristics more commonly associated with the gender you were born with does not mean that the middle 5% deserve any less respect or opportunity.
So is there a what a man, besides me, who would be your male role models?
A guy like Richard Reeves, outstanding what he does, handsome, strong. I said Van Jones, a guy like Obama, guy like Muhammad Ali, who had a set of core principles that were non-negotiable for him. I think I'll give you an example. I think Hillary Clinton demonstrates wonderful masculinity.
Yeah,
I think she's incredibly strong.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a key point because I think femininity should be celebrated, but so should masculinity. And those attributes aren't sequestered to people born as men or women. I'm drawn, and I've told you this, most of my close male friends are very feminine. And they take care of me. They're very nurturing. And those are wonderful attributes. And there are some women I know, including yourself, that demonstrate wonderful masculinity. But I think it's okay to say we need to celebrate it and that young men have an easier time leaning into it and that we value our young men and we value these attributes. And also to tell young men it's okay. A, they have an obligation to be a provider, a protector, and a procreator, and to be strong, to make money, to approach strange women, to demonstrate an interest, a romantic interest while making people feel safe, to want to make money, to want to be patriotic, to want to be strong. These are all wonderful things, and you should lean into it.
So let's finish up with talking about some solutions. A lot of your advice is great on an individual level, but some of the forces holding men back are going to require collective action or legislation even. No amount of telling your friends you love them is going to stop robots from taking jobs or making housing cheaper, for example. Some of the reforms we talked about on Pivot, including regulating tech, including age gating, social media and AI chatbots and stuff around porn, making schools phone-free zones. Talk about, but to help boys and men, what are the most realistic reforms states or Congress or anything could make to make it happen? And culturally, how do we create the positive momentum for boys at an early age that reverses some of the trends that plague them as they get older? Lack of meaningful friendships, higher addiction rates, as you noted, higher suicide rates.
Well, the incumbents, mostly technology and people who don't want to acknowledge that young men are struggling, will claim these issues are too complex. We have screwed this up. We can unscrew it. There are a lot of programs that we could enact pretty quickly. So let's start with schooling. Red shirt boys. Boys are 18 months behind women in terms of prefrontal cortex maturity. They're just immature relative to girls. Boys start kindergarten at 6, girls start at 5. More male teachers in high schools, more efforts to recruit them. It's verging towards 1 in 4 teachers in K through 12 are men. We need to acknowledge that boys are twice as likely to be suspended for the same behavioral adjusted behavior in schools as girls. We need to acknowledge that boys probably need more physical activity. When you have boys-only schools, they have double the amount of recess.
That's right.
They're just different. Think about what you want in school. Sit still, raise your hand, be a pleaser,
I
be
know.
organized.
It's designed for girls.
You just described a girl.
Yeah.
More vocational programming. There's a ton of vocational jobs. There's all these stories about kids who are 17, take auto shop, learn how to install an EV battery or HVAC, energy efficient HVAC, and are making $110,000 by the time they're 18. Stop shaming vocational programming and weaponize our public universities such that at least 20% of their degrees are non-traditional certification, whether it's nursing.
You've given money in this area too.
I have, or building nuclear power plants, whatever it might be, especially construction, realizing that 2/3 of our kids are not cut out to get a traditional liberal arts degree. Right. If you are not expanding your freshman class size faster than population growth, you lose your tax-free status. Universities are public servants, not fucking Chanel bags. We need to stop this rejectionist, exclusionary culture that makes it so expensive for people to go to school and disproportionately hurts young men because, quite frankly, academically, they typically don't have their shit together by the time they're 18. 7 to 10 high school valedictorians are girls. If we were totally admissions blind at NYU, it'd probably be 70 or 80% female. So I'm not suggesting we have affirmative action for boys. I think we need more seats so we can let in more Republicans, more gay kids, more trans kids, and more men. I think we need a massive rethink about our tax policy because essentially our tax policy just transfers money from young people to old people. I think we should have mandatory national service.
Me too.
I think that a lot of young men and a lot of young women, but especially a lot of young men, just aren't ready for college or haven't gotten their shit together. And I think having a very structured environment where they get to meet great people from different sexual orientations, income backgrounds, ethnicities, serving in the agency of their country. I think we need young people to just see how wonderful other Americans are and develop a greater fidelity for the flag as opposed to identify as Americans before they identify as a special interest group.
I agree.
And I think it would be great seasoning for them. And then another tax policy, I actually think we need to subsidize third places. I think we need to figure out a way to get people more incentive. You know what? People can't afford to go to bars. They can't afford to go out and drink and meet each other. Sports leagues, church groups are all closing down because people are inside.
Yeah, I would agree. So I want to end my last question about asking about your dad. We haven't talked about your dad. Your dad passed away a few months ago. He had a lot of shortcomings as a father, which you pointed out. You make a lot of jokes about it, but in a lot of ways, he was a counter model to you and how you wanted to raise your sons. But I want to talk about what he might have done that was positive for you. And how do you want your sons to remember him?
That's a generous question. Look, my dad checked the instinctive box that every adult, every parent, every man needs to check. And that is he was a much better father to me than his father was to him. His father used to come home drunk, and I didn't know this. His sister told me this. His father used to come home drunk when he was a kid and wake him up and beat him. And, you think about the person who's supposed to be the protector in your life, and you get woken up and you get physically abused. He was never physically abusive to me. And he left school. He was pulled out of school to work as a messenger at the age of 13. So he just didn't have a lot of great role models so he was, and he did leave my mom and I. He made life much harder for us than was probably needed. But at the same time, he did try. He'd be in Chicago and try and figure out a way to fly me out there. And then he would take me to a museum, which I could tell he had no interest in. And neither did I, but he thought he was supposed to take a kid to a museum. So, he tried. And then later in life, and it's never too late to do this, he became very sensitive, not very sensitive, but very loving. And what I would say to any man is that just because with your kid, if you weren't as sensitive or as affectionate or as emotive as you could have been, it's never too late, because that's kind of the memory I have of my father was he would for 10 years, the last 20 years of his life, whenever we talk on the phone, he'd say, I love you. And it took me 10 years to say it back because it just felt awkward. I'm like, Dad, I could have used this at 8. I don't need it at 38. But let me put it this way. At a very basic level, Kara, he tried. He was better to me than his father was to me. And also, I have made an exceptional living communicating.
Mm-hmm.
I got that from my father. My father could hold a room like no person. And I have to acknowledge, and just because he didn't try, he didn't give it to me on a silver platter, there's no reason you can't be grateful.
Right.
I make millions of dollars basically in the business of storytelling, and I inherited that from my father. So, and I made the best decision I ever made was a decision my dad made. And that is he got on a steamship at the age of 19 and came to America. So his risk aggressiveness, deciding to come to America, paid huge dividends for me. I wouldn't be on this podcast with you if I'd been born in Glasgow, Scotland.
Right.
I wouldn't be, I just wouldn't have nearly the opportunities I had. So the risks he took have the DNA I inherited from him, the ability to be born being born in San Diego, and the fact that he tried, and towards the end of his life, he really did try to be a decent, loving man. That's better. That's probably better than a lot of dads. And also what I would tell people, men and women who are parents of divorce, you have a tendency to sanctify one and demonize the other. And what you realize as you get older is, the one wasn't perfect and the other one wasn't Darth Vader.
Right. Yep, that's a really good point. All right, very last question. What's something you've learned from your sons about being a man?
Look, for me, I've what I've gotten from my boys is it's my purpose. I finally feel as if I have my purpose. I always used to think that somewhere my purpose was, or what I was driving toward, try to be more awesome, try to be more wealthy, try to be more relevant.
Yeah, better skin.
And then when you have boys, it's like, okay, my job is to raise loving, patriotic men. And so just the opportunity to raise them, you learn a lot as a parent. One of the most upsetting things I learned, I'm not their friend, I'm their dad. I love Michelle Obama's parenting advice. Like, you kind of have to be an asshole so they're not assholes. Like, you have to have really hard conversations. I had a very hard conversation with my 15-year-old before I got on the plane. Sometimes he's not cooperative or respectful with his mother when I'm out of the house. And I had to, so you're not their friend. You want them to know you love them immensely. But what I have learned from my boys, or what they've given me, is I finally have a sense of purpose for the first time in my life. It sounds weird, but I don't want to say I don't fear death, but I finally feel like I could go and have meant something because I have really good, as you do, I have really good sons who are going to be good citizens and are kind and they're nice and they're good to their mom. And I know they're going to take care of their mom. I know that they feel a sense of obligation to be good to society. So it's like I feel this sense of purpose and relief, like all this kind of maybe meant something.
Yeah. Well, you've done a good job. They're nice boys. Anyway, Scott, this is a wonderful book. I really appreciate you talking for so long, and you're a good man.
Thank you, Kara. I appreciate that, and I'm blessed to have you in my life.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
All of the masculine attributes that you bring to the table.
Me and Hillary Clinton.
Today's show was produced by Kristen Castor-Russell, Kateri Yoakum, Michelle Alloy, Megan Burney, and Kaylin Lynch. Nishat Kurwa is Vox Media's executive producer of podcasts.
Special thanks to Catherine Barner. Our theme music is by Trackademics. If you're already following this show, you're a male role model. If not, turn off the porn and go outside. Thanks for watching. See you on Thursday.